Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, which is the first webinar of the year for us at Oxys, that is going to be centered about best practices for maintaining and supporting your RPA robots for long-term success. My name is Fabiana. I'm the marketing director at Oxys, and I will have the pleasure to introduce you today to our panelists, Eduardo and Courtney. But before we get started, I just wanted to remind everyone that your lines are muted, but we want to make this session today as interactive as possible. So please, as you know, Eduardo and Courtney go through the presentation, don't hesitate to leave us your questions in the question panel, and we will make sure to address your questions as we go through the session today. So without further ado, I'm just going to turn it over to Eddie, the head of our intelligent automation practice.
Thank you, Fabi. As Fabi was mentioning, my name is Eduardo Liquez. For the people who don't know me, I am the managing director of the intelligent automation practice at Oxys. I've been working mostly with RPA and Uipath for almost 5.5 years, going into 6 years. It's been an amazing experience. Today, we're going to be focusing really on, once your robots go live, which is when reality of RPA really begins. What are the things to watch for? What are some of the lessons learned that we now know after having maintained production bots for more than 5 years? And then, how to make sure that those continue to be improved and continue to drive the value that you wanted it from the get-go. Also, I'm very thankful for Courtney Dominguez, who will be, joining the panel. She will be introducing herself in a minute once we start with the conversation. But before we do that, I just wanted to level set a little bit of, what we were trying to do with this webinar series. Organizations have now really, evolved in the RPA space. And we just wanted to talk about, how to really maximize the value of your automation program in 2022. And for that, we're going to go through this theme through all the topics about, the automation vision and governance and the right processes and procedures to make sure that you're successful, making sure that you have the right talent. And we're going to be touching different areas of that in every one of the webinars, and then having the right technology enablers and the right technology platform to really achieve the goals of your organization. In today's conversation, we're going to really be focusing on the critical role that support plays in your Uipath program and RPA program as a whole, making sure that you think about what the right operating model for your organization is. And we're going to be talking about the differences between some of those and the pros and cons that we're going to find. Really introducing, what are the, how to do support right, going from being reactive to proactive maintenance with some of the key technology enablers that are out there in the RPA space, and really thinking about the talent, how to make sure that you have the right team, the right place with the right skill sets that can really, make sure that your support is not only working, but stable through time. So with that, I just wanted, before we get into the panel, talk a little bit about some of the things that we're seeing. As organizations now accelerate and expand through adoption, as we can see, RPA continues to be the fastest growing software segment on the market, with expected growth of, year over year, 25%, which is staggering. Naturally, before, organizations were really focused on building automations, but now that years have gone by, support becomes more and more important. And even though you can see here that 40% of RPA projects fail to meet the expectations, not necessarily fail that they're not worth it, but they're not really meeting expectations of the organization. And in most cases, is led by not taking maintenance needs into account while the design is being done. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as RPA expands and grows through organizations, and organizations mature around what really RPA does and what to watch for once this automations go into production. And then, maintenance of existing automations keeps being one of the most disliked tasks performed by RPA developers today. So that creates an inherent problem around, this is something that I built 2 years ago. This is something that is providing a tremendous value to the organization, but my team really doesn't want to do the work that it requires to make sure that these automations keep providing the benefits. So how to manage that is going to be critical. So before getting the panel, I wanted to give a chance for Courtney to do a little bit of an intro. She brings amazing experience on the RPA space for amazing organizations and in several automation tools, not just Uipath. So I'm really glad that she could join today and be part of the conversation. Courtney, could you introduce yourself?
Hey, thanks, Eddie. So I'm Courtney Dominguez. I am an RPA strategic consultant. I've had the opportunity and the pleasure, actually, of working with Oxys in a number of areas and partnering on a number of opportunities. So I've had the good fortune of working with a number of industries. And like Eddie said, I do have a background with Uipath, but I've also been with a number of clients that are leveraging other technologies as well. So, and that's always a great experience to be able to compare the various technologies across both industries and also various platforms. So looking forward today, as always, to talk about RPA. It's a passion of mine. I love to make things better and make things more efficient. So looking forward to talking about all things RPA support today.
Awesome, thanks, Courtney. So let's just get into some of the topics that we wanted to discuss today. So one of the first topics that I wanted to discuss with Courtney is, and please, like Fabio was mentioning, if you have any questions around each specific topic as we go through the webinar, please make sure to add it through the chat, and Fabio can ask the question, just make it as interactive as possible. So we wanted to talk first about the role of support in building a successful RPA program. Courtney, could you start by giving us your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think this is an area that's probably one of the most under thought about areas when you're starting an RPA program. Everyone tends to be really excited about getting their first bots in production. They want to get things rolling. And the nice thing I think about RPA in general is that it, unlike a traditional ERP or software implementation where it may take a very long time to roll things out, RPA can be rolled out very quickly and sometimes within weeks. So people are very eager to get those bots in production. And they, like you said, nobody likes doing production support. Typically, that's not an RPA thing, that's a software development thing. Nobody likes to do support. So nobody wants to think about that until something breaks. And unlike maybe a traditional ERP application where you've got bugs and it can take some time to get those corrected, when a bot goes down, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but your SLA to get that bot back online tends to be very fast because this is a task that was previously performed by a person, and sometimes that person isn't there, has been reallocated, or sometimes you don't have the same number of people in your organization to be able to perform those tasks anymore. So being able to get that bot back online very quickly is critical to the success of the program and also critical to the success of the bots itself. Because the longer a bot is down, the more individuals have a tendency to revert back to those old tasks and continuing to do things manually. And they lose it loses a lot of momentum in the organization. So I think that support is one of the things that really needs to be, although it comes at kind of the tail end, just like any software development program, it's critical to be able to having those conversations up front so you're not caught by surprise when something does go down. Unfortunately, bots have sick days just like people, and they go down and they go offline, and so it's important to have those conversations up front.
I think I couldn't agree with you more. One of the big things that, as you can see in the slide, is that RPA and ongoing maintenance is often the most overlooked and suffer from underinvestment from the beginning. A lot of organizations really tend to think of it as a afterthought at the beginning of their journey, but in reality, the road to hyper automation or being able to live with automations, starts with the vision and the executive sponsorship and getting started. And this is where most organizations are really excited, step 1 and 2. They're really invested and really wanting to see these robots go live. But mastering post-implementation support, it is absolutely needed to take the next step into automation and really bringing this ample opportunity of efficiency across the organization. Because like you said, the moment that some of these robots break and there's nobody there to fix it, or the organization suffers significantly from it, naturally stifles investment, stifles buy-in, adoption, and basically says, yes, it's great while it worked, but now I am suffering so much that it's not worth for me to go after new opportunities. And this is where one of the reasons why you got to do it, but most importantly, the reason why it's overlooked and underinvested is because people don't really understand what's required once these robots go live. They expect that robots are built in and forget them, or there's no reason why robots could break because it's standard code and there is no reason for them to make mistakes. But the reality is that there is a significant number of dependencies from infrastructure and access and application changes that you may or may not control that naturally break those automations, and we're going to be talking a little bit about those. So before we get further into the conversation, I just wanted to gauge a little bit the the registrants and the people who are participating on the webinar. Where are they on their automation journey? So I just wanted to pull out the first polling question for the audience and really, asking, how many automations are currently supporting in production by your teams? And some of the answers could be, we have not started your journey, or we are just piloting and nothing is in production yet. We're moving from 1 to 10, 10 to 20 automations, or more than 20 automations. Let's just give it a second for people to respond.
Thank you, Eddie. So I have opened the polling question, and we have already gathered around 55% of the vote. So I'm waiting for a little bit more responses, and I'll issue and share with you the results in a minute.
Okay, perfect. Just give me one more minute.
Yep. Perfect. So I'm gonna close them now. And it's interesting, Eddie. Basically, 38% of the audience today have not started with the journey of RPA, but out of the ones that have, more than 20 automations, 24%, 10 to 20, 14%, 1 to 10, 14%, and then 10% are in a pilot program.
Thanks, Fabian. I think there are two good things, for the people who have not started, which is the majority from what I've heard. It's good that you guys are getting this information before you get started. It's definitely something that I did not have the moment that we began. And we definitely suffered from the same things, underinvestment and thinking that this was going to be easier to keep up and make sure that the organization was happy. And also seeing how the comments that I had at the beginning are true now, having a, 1/4 of the attendees having more than 20 automations in production means that people have gone further down that path, where I think the webinar that I did in 2019, it was harder to find organizations that had more than 10. So thanks for that. So for the next topic, let's talk about how to build the right support model. So there are many things that need to be thought about when really building your right operating model and support model. Is it going to be in-house? Is it going to be a third party? Is it going to be a hybrid model? Courtney, I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. What have you seen from your clients and from the previous organization that you spearheaded?
Yeah, so it's an interesting mix. I think I've seen where it's been fully outsourced. I've seen where it's completely insourced in-house. I don't know that there's necessarily a right model that fits every organization, but I do think that this is a space where potentially outsourcing makes a lot of sense. And the reason for that is because, one of the nice things about bots is they can work 24/7. Not all bots work 24/7, but many organizations have bots that work after hours. And I think the nice thing about having a support model that's outsourced is you're able to leverage a organization that is there to provide that 24/7 support. A lot of times, especially when you're doing it in-house, you're maybe leveraging an existing support team, or in some cases, you might be leveraging some of the existing developers to do that support, especially in maybe a smaller organization. And being able to support your bots 24/7 always tends to be a challenge. Especially for those that are running on the weekends. Like any support model, it's a challenge when you've got bots that are running offline and running every day of the week. So although I've seen a mixed bag across my clients and the organizations that I've previously supported, I do think that outsourcing, especially once you get to scale, once you reach, kind of that critical mass, like 24% or over 20 automations, that becomes enough where you really do need a full-time support team to be able to support those bots as they're running and fix them, right? As we've already mentioned, they do break. And so the important thing is being able to fix them and get them back online as quickly as possible. So I think that, outsourcing in this case does make a lot of sense.
Thanks, Courtney. And I think here is the things, and I agree with you that sometimes there's not one size fits all. There's definitely not one model for every organization out there. But one of the biggest themes that I do believe it fits for everybody is that the goal for every organization is to try to have segregation between the implementation team and the support team. You want to make sure that the people who are building bots are not supporting bots for several reasons. One of them being you want to make sure that people who are building bots are being as productive as they can. They're not breaking their work in the middle of the day because something changed, so they lose momentum or their train of thought, and then it takes them more time to just pick up their automations where they were. And it's not something that we shared, but it's also one of the main reasons why there 40% of automations don't fall through expectations is because they take longer to build. And the main reason is because more than 70%, and we're going to be talking about that, of RPA developers are building robots and supporting bots at the same time. They have a dual responsibility. But by having the segregation and a dedicated support team, even though you're going to have some challenges, which is first, not having the scale to justify full-time equivalents to just doing support, and then retaining talent for the same reasons that we discussed at the beginning. But the great benefits that you get are you're going to eliminate the dependencies on individual knowledge, on just this person knows this robot. We've heard the stories in the previous of other technologies like macros, where you have something that is really the finance team is really dependent on, but only one person knows how that macro works. And if it breaks or that person leaves, it becomes a real problem for the department. The same way, it's a perfect way to have standardized development framework. It's basically segregation of duties. You want to make sure that a team that is building automations is thinking that they have to build this in a way where anybody can understand it. It's not their code, it's the company's code, it's the COE's code. It's got to be following the same framework, the same standards, the same language. And it also, RPA support provides as a pre-go live quality control engine. So before anything goes live, the support team needs to accept it. So for those reasons, the segregation of duties is critical. When it comes down to how you staff it, which is the in-house, or you have consultants help you build it and then you run it, or then having a hybrid team where you have consultants or third-party providers helping you do this, it will depend on the size of your organization. It will depend on the number of automations that you have, and how much of a core is RPA to your organization. We've seen organizations that have COEs of 70, 80 people. For those cases, naturally, in-house is going to be a natural model for them. But for organizations that have 20, 40 processes in production, it's really hard to justify redundancy on your support team. You need at least 2 people, right? If somebody leaves, if you're going to do a 24/7 support, for those things, it's really hard to justify before you get to 100 automations. So that's where I think Courtney's comments on maybe a third party makes real sense when it comes down to that, because we're able to leverage the fact that we are controlling and managing more than 15 different automation environments with more than 400 or 500 automations last time I checked. So then it really becomes, for us, we can really share FTEs and resources to make sure that we provide the levels of service that are required for all these organizations. So continuing on, we wanted to get into the polling question number 2. And we wanted to understand, what is your current RPA model? So is it 100% in-house? Are you leveraging a third party for support or development or strategy, or you're still figuring out what the right model is for you?
And one of the key things here is that you can select more than one option. So you may be, leveraging a partner for existing developments and new developments, so you can check second and third and so on. So let's give it a couple of more seconds, Eddie, and I'll share the results with you. It seems that it's going to come very similar to the last time, which is still a lot of people are just figuring it out. So I'll close the poll now. So yep, 53% is still figuring out the right model for them. 35% are doing it 100% in-house. 35% are leveraging a partner for new developments. 24% are leveraging a partner for support of existing robots, and 6% are leveraging a partner for the strategy and business analysis.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, it's pretty lining up to the previous answer. Thank you for that. So going into the next topic, see this moving, okay, which is how to structure and measure your support. More than how to build your operating model is some of the key operating procedures, processes that your support team needs to follow, and really how to measure success. And that's something that it varies, and I understand different organizations will take a different take. But Courtney, what are some of the key I guess learnings that you've had over your years doing this?
So I think the first thing is the critical part is actually measuring it. So I think a lot of, again, back to a traditional ERP, a lot of IT and development teams are used to maybe not being able to measure the value of putting in a large ERP system or a large CRM system. But I think that measuring the value of both support and your bots in general is critical to being able to show the value that they're providing. So doing that measuring up front is number one. And I certainly see a lot of organizations that have good energy in that space, but maybe they don't actually implement it. So just doing the measurement and making sure that you're providing bot health, providing the ROI back on your bots is a critical first step. So just doing that, I think, is important. But then being able to provide metrics around the ROI is really important, but also measuring bot health, right? You want to be able to measure uptime. You want to be able to measure the number of transactions that are successfully being processed. So I think a lot of companies focus, when they think bots, they think of bot utilization. They think of how many bots do I have? That to a lot of companies, how many bots is a critical measurement. I'm not sure it's about so many bots. It's more about how many processes and transactions are you running through those processes. That's really important. So it's not necessarily how many bots you have, but a lot of people like to do that. So not just looking at bot utilization, but looking at the health and the uptime and the number of successful transactions, I think, are really important. So if you have a lot of bots in production, but they're constantly breaking, not sure that would be a sign of a successful program. So it's really more about how efficient are your bots running, how many transactions are they processing, and how often. The way to measure your support team is just and your development team is to see how often your bots are breaking, and then doing that analysis and figuring out why. Because if you're having a lot of downtime, again, it's going to just really it's going to erode the success of your overall program and your organization. So making sure that you're having that that clean handoff between the developers and the support team is important, but also measuring the success of your development, and measuring the success of the support is a measurement of how well you've done your development.
Perfect. We're going to get into some information that exactly follows that train of thought, because we, at least on my head, the number one, I guess, rule of success for the RPA support team is ensuring business continuity. And it's hard to think about these things once you started building automations. And not all automations should be treated equally when it comes down to support, because the reality is that you're going to have some automations that may be incredibly impactful and could be incredibly stable because you control everything that the automation is doing, from the applications it's running on. You understand the life cycle of changes, and you're part of that as your organization. But in reality, we have automations in healthcare that they are working with third-party platforms like payer portals that tend to change often. And usually there's huge business cases around that. And a lot of people were assigned to those jobs, and they're currently, like you mentioned before, they may have been shifted to do other actions or be part of other departments. But now you have automations that can break down in a moment's notice without you ever having the capability to react quickly to it. So one of the biggest things that you need to do is assess those implications of automating a process. Understand that there's a probability that if something changes without your control, you're going to be without that automation for a couple of weeks. And what would be the business impact of that happening? Would you be able, do you have the right contingency plans to bring in staffing levels up to make sure that during those 2 weeks there is not a huge business disruption? Or are we able to accept those consequences as part of this, making sure that, hey, the benefit is worth the squeeze? I guess the juice is worth the squeeze when it comes down to automation. And those things are rarely thought about once you start automation, and really thinking, let's talk about different things. Invoice processing is a great example. You can have the automation down for a couple of weeks and it wouldn't matter because you have 60, 90 days payables. So even you get it run back, you get it up and running, you go through the backlog, nothing happened to the business didn't even notice. But when it comes down to something that is generating revenue or processing orders, if a bot that is processing orders is down for 2 weeks, you better have the people to process that or you're going to lose the revenue. And those are kind of the things that you need to make sure that you consider as part of your automation journey and your support team. Some of the things that we usually do, these are standard, and this was a way to just put in examples out there, is how to intake some of those issues of having the right level of SLAs, service level agreements, so that the business understands what's to be expected. What should be the response times? When should I hear about how long is it going to take to fix this automation? Should be standardized and should be measured against. So depending on your level of impact to the business and the urgency of these automations, like I was talking before, you may have different versions of your priority levels for your specific company. Maybe this may change for you and the response times will change. The one thing that we don't know and nobody will ever know is that in case an application change, how long is it going to take? There's no promise that nobody can give you of how fast will we be able to change, because the change could be as easy as changing a couple of workflows, or it could be we have to redo the whole work again. So it's important for the organization to really be level setting with you and be working with you and making sure that you get to the right place. And when it comes down to measuring success, I think that I couldn't agree more. You kind of read my mind. Most RPA COEs are tracking number of automations. They're tracking productivity gains, how fast my automations are delivering benefit. What's the robot utilization? How many hours of the day are those robots being used? And some are getting all the level down to cost savings and hours saved. But none or most of them are not really doing a good job of understanding number of incidents per automation. What's the uptimes on those automations? Incident types, is it a network issue, hardware issue? Am I having credentials issue? Is it an applications change? And many others that we could, I guess, count, and making sure that you understand what are the root causes of those incidents that are happening, and really, SLA evaluation resolution times and automation downtimes, so that you can really know, are those automations providing the benefit that you expected to the organization?
Eddie, I have a couple of questions that have accumulated before we move. So one is, how do you ensure a successful migration of existing processes to your outsourcing support model when your team wasn't the one building those robots?
So if I go back to and that's one of the reasons why I always advocate for a segregated team, is that the first thing that we got to do when we do that, and we have done that several times, is that we go and do a code review of the automation, and we make sure that before we take ownership of the automation, we restructure the code to follow our reframework, so that we understand the error handlings and the asset management and all the different variables are up to up to our standards that are required for us to maintain it. And then there is a hypercare transition period where we work with your existing team while the robot is in production, while managing the issues. It's basically a redeployment of the whole automation. We gotta review it. We gotta document the process. We gotta have conversations with the business of understanding what are the key exceptions that the robot is having issues with, so that we have an understanding of that, and then we take that on. It's not a lengthy process, but it depends on the complexity of the project, but it's definitely something that we do on a regular basis with our own teams. It's basically our support team is always receiving code from a third party in a way. It's our development team is doing that. So there's that segregation in place.
Thank you, Eddie. The other question was, Courtney mentioned a benchmark about how many processes can be maintained to justify a full-time person. Can you repeat the data? Like, they didn't get the detail in terms of the benchmark.
I think Eddie mentioned that it's about 30 or 20 to 40 per full-time support person. I think that's probably directionally correct. I would also add to that having not just having a support person, but also having somebody that's actually monitoring and doing the administrative side of it is also really important. So sometimes I've seen, if you can't have a dedicated support person to justify the number of processes, I think adding in that admin layer is also helpful, and also helps to justify having that support person when they also have some administrative duties and maybe monitoring the bots and making sure that everything's up. So, but I think the number Eddie threw out there was about 30, and that sounds directionally correct.
And that's a great add, Courtney, because yeah, I wasn't counting on the fact that that person needs management and all of the data gathering, presenting to the business. That's something that service level reviews need to be done. So this is basically the monitoring and fixing of about 20 to 40 well-built automations. At the beginning, we were at 15. Let's put it that way. As the evolution of making sure that this framework is followed and that issue management as much as possible is automated, and when it comes down to creating the issues and understanding with screenshots what's actually happening, and there we got to the 20 to 40 per person.
Great, thank you. Those are all the questions that I have for now.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Fabi. So moving on to one of the hottest topics of the moment, not just in RPA, but across almost everybody, it's talent management. And knowing what we had discussed, the question is, does RPA support present even a greater challenge than just regular RPA staffing? And I wanted to hear from you, Courtney, what you thought when you were working at WorldFuel and other organizations. How was this managed? Was it an issue keeping the talent? I know that in my case, the people in support are often thinking and asking about what's the next step.
Yeah, I agree, because I think especially in any support organization, you're always thinking about, where do I go from here? So, I wanted, especially once you've done support for a while, I think those resources love to start building their own, bots to be able to support it, and they want to do new development. So I think support's a great place to learn, because you can learn off of bots that are already built, and hopefully built in a way that is to the organization's standards and best practices. So I think that support's a great place to start. I do think that support individuals tend to like to move into new development eventually. So yeah, it's a challenge. I think RPA in general, RPA developers, RPA support personnel, RPA administrators is a real challenge to find and keep talent, because this is such a hot market right now, and so many organizations have gone through it's the Great Resignation, right? So many organizations have gone through so many changes and are really looking for ways to streamline and make things more efficient, so they can just work with the talent that they have. And so a lot of companies, if you haven't looked at RPA already, are starting to look at RPA, and they're trying to find that RPA talent out there. And I guess the good thing is if you're in the RPA space, it's a highly sought after career. And I know Gartner and a number of other organizations have put out there that I think LinkedIn, it's one of the top most searched titles that's out there, is people looking for RPA talent. So I think it's a real challenge. Not sure that I have any silver bullets and how to resolve the issue, but yeah, it's a challenge just like everywhere else. But I think RPA especially is definitely a challenge in attracting and retaining the right talent.
And we have seen the same thing. One of the benefits, at least, that we have, and here's before I get there, I think RPA developers that start their career in the support space while being mentored by skilled and seasoned developers end up being much better developers than the person who just basically you're dropping into the pool for development. And some of the key reasons why is that on their first experience, they understand what does it take to have an automation in production. They're living and breathing the issues. They are learning from, even though it's from other people's mistakes, it ends up being their own mistakes as they're fixing the code or they're moving things into production, and they're being able to see what real life in automation looks like. You will find that there's so many issues that you didn't think about. It was impossible for you to think about what you were doing the development, that as you're going through support, you'll see even errors that happen that you cannot replicate. You'll never be able to build a code for the bot to handle that again, because the application, maybe it's a third-party application, or maybe it's a very specific scenario that had never happened before, and you can't find data to be able to test that again. It really drives the knowledge of the developers to a separate level. And we at Oxys really do that and start their careers on the support team so that they can learn from seasoned developers, be part of that team, and really understand what really takes in different applications, right? Understanding how SAP behaves, how Oracle, PeopleSoft behaves, and NetSuite, and all these applications that we're able to support from our team gives them a breadth of knowledge once they're going out and building new automations. That is, I think, is a great stepping stone. So for that reason, I think it's a great starting point, but it gets old quick. And we have seen in our case that they're really looking for a career change in the near future, which for most organizations that have a captive is really hard to provide. It's really hard to just basically provide a career path if you're having a COE of 5 developers for them to grow as fast as they want. So we end up just moving and switching to other organizations. Here on this survey that Uipath did about the, I guess, developer landscape worldwide, and they were talking about the things they were doing and the things that they enjoy and the things that they did not enjoy, as we mentioned at first. The 2 tasks that they really hated was creating documentation and maintaining existing automations. But one thing to me was very interesting, that about 71% of developers are having a dual role. They're building automations and they're maintaining automations. Like I was mentioning, in order to get to that scale, is really hard to justify those full-time equivalents and really break, because the easiest thing is to always have, and where most teams will revert to, is having the person who built it maintain it. It's easier. There is no knowledge transfer. You can basically, you feel like you have a secured automation because that person can provide all the knowledge until that person ups and leaves. And then it becomes a real pain for the organization, and the operation starts hurting from it. So I think a lot of, and we're going to be talking in a bit, some of the steps that Uipath has taken to try to alleviate the problem with Test Suite, Task Capture for automating the actual documentation process of automations. As you know, rarely initial documentations of automations end up being the same as the automation itself. I think I've never seen one. So I think it's great that this Task Capture came into place that can really help automate the documentation of a process once you know exactly what the robot is doing. But those were kind of the findings that we were looking at. Naturally, building new RPA solutions is the preferred version. And looking at some of their, based on this, looking at some of the metrics that Uipath was able to find with the survey on the RPA developers and their mobility. So you have 80% of developers that one way or another are willing to move in a moment's notice, with 36% of them actively looking for new opportunities. And they're most driven by income and finding new growth opportunities, which if you're looking at captive shared service or captive COEs, and it's not a huge one, it's really hard for you to provide that growth that they're yearning for, right? Unless somebody else leaves, which creates an even bigger problem, which very likely that person who left for them to open a position was a higher senior position in the development space. But they're not going, most of them are not going out of the RPA space. They want to keep doing RPA. They're excited about doing RPA. 75% are going to look for a new RPA opportunity somewhere else, which naturally drives that competition and making sure that those opportunities for the developers are staying the same. And I think this is some of the reasons why, and I understand this is self-serving, but some of the positions why a third party like us, doesn't have to be us, can really provide some good support on this space by you not having to go through this pain, which we're definitely, everybody in the industry is going through. So the last topic that, Fabi, anything you wanted to add?
No, not for now. I have a couple of questions that I think are gonna fit more into this section, so I'm waiting.
Okay. So some of the key technology enablers that have come up to help organizations do this support is critical. At the beginning, you were looking at automation, programs, just basically having to create SQL databases with, BI, platforms in front of it to be able to understand what was happening in their automation platforms. And I think Uipath has done a great job at building offerings that can help do that. Outside of, doesn't have to be Uipath specific. I know, Courtney, you have worked with many others in many other technologies, but I just wanted to get your thoughts on some of the key things that you think support teams should have as part of their enabling technologies to be able to provide a good service to the organization.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on Insights. I mean, I think that's been a great addition to the overall Uipath suite of tools. Like you said, previously you were building some BI dashboards, Tableau, whatever, on top of your databases. And I think that Uipath Insights has been a great tool, and it puts the technology in the hands of not just IT, but also the business team as well. So the business team can easily look at, pre-created dashboards or create their own dashboards to be able to run all of those important things that we've already talked about, how you're measuring your organization and you're measuring the success of your program. So I think having that out there and in the hands of not just the individuals that are supporting it from an IT perspective, but also on the business side, I think is really important. And it holds everybody accountable. So, I've been in organizations where maybe the bots aren't running and the business never said anything about it, and they just said, oh, well, it broke, and we just went back to our old ways. So it keeps everybody honest, and that way that on the business side, they can also be looking at it and saying, hey, this isn't running as efficiently as I thought it was or needed to be. So I think tools like that are really really important to holding both the business and IT, both from a development and a support standpoint, in the holding them accountable. And you also mentioned task capture, and I think not just task capture, because I know that's a Uipath specific tool, but documentation in general, I think, is also something that's critical to having it up front. Like you said, it very typically evolves and doesn't come out at the end when you automate it like you started at the beginning. But having those tools to be able to do that documentation, both as a starting point so that the business can say, hey, this is really what I'm doing. Because I think a lot of times you get something as an input and the business says they're doing it one way, and you find out they actually have, a sticky note on their computer and they're doing it another way. So having that upfront documentation, and then also having the documentation to be able to hand over to your support team, whether that's an in-house support team or an outsourced support team, is really critical to the success of being able to support those bots on the long term. So I think those are technologies that are really, they're business facing and IT facing, that really help enable the support of the entire program.
And yes, I understand that we, in this webinar series, will be really focused on in the Uipath programs, but I understand a lot of organizations do not do documentation right. I think keeping it up
or at all
is really hard. And to the question that I was mentioning, for organizations that have asked us to take over their automations, we have asked for documentation. Doesn't exist. So it's something that, doing from scratch is very difficult. And these tools that we're going to be discussing really provide a lot of support on that. And really thinking UiPath, outside of having naturally a technology that enables for issue management, like a ServiceNow type of ticketing system, which is absolutely critical for you to understand open issues, open incidents, how long have they been open, if they're infringing on your SLAs. It's important for you to naturally have that. But in order for you to have visibility of what's happening on your environment, on what to expect, the whole name of the game is to go from reactive to proactive maintenance. You want to make sure that you know before your business partner knows. The best email that can come up as part of the support team is this robot is down, this is what happened, we're taking care of it, before you notice that happened. And for that, you need to have the clear governance. You have to have the right communication mechanisms, and you have to have the right SLAs and automations, and measuring and reporting of those SLAs and the benefits of the automation. For those, UiPath on their suite has done a great job with insights for everything that is about measuring the benefits of your program, measuring uptimes, measuring success percentages of your automations. We're going to go through a little bit of that in a minute. But really, one of the biggest things that they've done to try to be proactive is Test Suite. And the only thing that it does is basically creating test sets that you can run continuously to understand if something is about to break. I understand that there's going to be some automations, like you were saying, Courtney, that run 24/7 every day, that the moment that they break, you'll know. There is no way to anticipate when is it going to break. But for automations that run on the quarter end, on the month end close, that they got to be ready for prime time. It's happening, it's got to be done during these days. If those automations don't run right, you're basically delaying your close for your organization. You can use Test Suite to make sure that the day prior to you running your automations, if they're going to work. You can do it 2 days prior and knowing that it's going to work. So you're going to have that level of confidence to say to the organization, you should expect uptimes on your automation, unless you're going to run something different than the exceptions and the scenarios that we have automated for you. And that brings a level of, control and confidence that is rarely found. Test Suite can be used, and we're going to be talking about later on, for more than that. But it's one of the biggest things that you can get from it. So with Uipath Insights, here's a mock-up of what you can get from it. It's basically a platform for modeling and analytics. Anything that Orchestrator has, or anything that is logged by your robots, can be displayed by Insights. So you can now display benefit percentages, utilization of robots, when are they being used, what's the percentage of success for your automations, what's the cost that happened, is it a credentials issue, is it a network issue, I cannot access the computer, is it a new selector which is an application change. So it becomes much easier for you to report, maintain, and proactively fix your automations. It also alerts naturally for robot errors. And this is absolutely customizable to what you want on specific views. It has controls over who watches which dashboard. So if you're going to be seeing financial information, which is, more sensitive, then some users can have it. And if you're only going to be using uptimes, then the business user can have their own view of how their robot is working. So it's incredibly beneficial for organizations as they scale beyond just a couple of automations. And then the other technology that we really wanted to talk about, and we're going to be doing some specific webinars on this specific technologies in the next few months. But for Test Suite, we just wanted to give a little bit of a teaser. It really helps naturally to maintain and test your automations continuously and make sure that they're great for prime time, and where the errors are going to happen before they happen. But most importantly, they help you accelerate your release process. So whenever you're building new automations, you build your test cases in Test Suite, and before you put it into production, You run those scenarios, and automatically, digitally, you know if they were successful or unsuccessful. So you're not relying only on UAT, user-based approval of results, which is where most people are these days. You're saying, hey, these scenarios are supposed to be there. Here's the test data for that. Run them. Then the person goes and says, yes, it ran right, and you're done. This way, you're automating all that process. And with CI/CD, you can actually automatically deploy in your production environment your automations if all those checks run right. You don't need a deployment call that goes through all that pain. It really accelerates your deployment process as you're building automations naturally. This is not for all automations, but it can definitely help with those high impact, high volume automations that keep needing to be released to production often. Were you going to say anything, Fally?
No, I was just going to say that probably this takes us to our next polling question, right?
Yep.
Great. So, based on the overview that Eddie provided on Test Suite and Insights, we wanted to get a feeling on, most of the audience today are a Uipath customer, but we wanted to see how advanced are you on the full utilization of the platform. So if you can just mark the technologies within the platform that you're considering or already implementing in 2022, that would be very interesting to share. Test Suite, Insights, Automation Hub that goes together with Task Capture, Document Understanding, or still just the core robot capability. Probably, Eddie, after your explanation of the benefits, a lot of people are going to mark that they actually want to consider it.
Awesome. Yeah, sadly, I couldn't go in more detail, but as they're answering, I just wanted to give some time, knowing that we only have 8 minutes left. Were there any additional questions of how you?
So one of the questions that it was, where was the Oxys RPA development and support team located?
So we work on a nearshore model for the US. So we have a hybrid model. All of the management, solutions architecture, some of the business analysts and project managers are in the US, and the developers, some of the solutions architects and business analysts are also in a nearshore location in Costa Rica and Colombia.
Thank you, Eddie. And do you support also organizations outside the US?
Yes, we do. So we're working with companies in the Bahamas. We work with companies in Spain and Europe, mostly.
Awesome. So I think I'm gonna basically share the results now of the survey, and I'll share it with you. All right. So basically, 50% are doing the core robots, but then the other ones are actually pretty aligned. 33% is evaluating or considering document understanding, 33% automation hub and task capture, 33% Uipath Insights, and then the smaller one would be Uipath Test Suite with 25%.
I think that's understandable. I think that, to be honest, Test Suite really comes in play once you have over 40 automations, and then it really becomes hard to keep testing and deploying automations. It's not something for I wouldn't say for people who are just starting their journey and haven't gotten to that level. I think once you'll find that once you get to 40, 50 automations and you're trying to continuously test for a release of SAP or for a release of PeopleSoft, it becomes very hard process manually. So that's where that technology comes into play. But I think it's aligned with what we're seeing with our customers.
So Eddie, for the attendees that are in the process of evaluating Uipath from scratch, typically what are the things that you would consider them to actually consider from the beginning? Because I think probably 2 years before, companies weren't jumping as fast into Insights and Automation Hub, but I think that you're seeing them pretty quickly, even in parallel with the core, no?
Yes, I think that those two products that you mentioned came out of the need and seen by the need of organizations how to control their pipelines and how to see and measure, because of what Courtney was mentioning, how to measure their success, because it becomes very difficult and labor intensive to just build a Power BI source with calculations on how to really measure your success. So what UiPath has done is really bundled those two products within their starter packs. So most organizations that we're seeing now are really bringing in Automation Hub and Insights as part of their initial license order, so that they can really control their pipeline management. Automation Hub mostly the main, I guess, reason for its existence is the actual pipeline management, value calculations, and being able to control what goes into the pipeline of production. Where Insights, it's really a plug and play solution that lets you see the actual benefit and the performance of your automations in production. So I'm seeing that those two are the, I guess, 1 and 2 solutions that are being added to the core, Studio Orchestrator, robots, and then very next to that is Document Understanding is being adopted aggressively across.
Thank you, Eddie. So I know we have 3 minutes left, so I think that it would be good to, tell you a little bit about the next topics of the next sessions of the webinar series. Some of you already registered at the same time for all of these, but if any of these particular topics, is of interest, we encourage you to go to the same registration page and basically mark the ones for which you want to get invitations. So the next one is coming up in a month on test automation. The other one, we're going to go into a little bit more details in terms of how to measure the performance of your COE. That one is coming in March. Uipath Citizen Development in May, and then a broader view of the whole hyperautomation platform with Uipath, and to really have a discussion on how you can be maximizing the full potential of the platform. That one is coming in June. And I think, Eddie, we talked about probably incorporating a document understanding session earlier. So
we'll see if one of them can be switched. Based on popular demand, we'll see if one of them could be switched to add document understanding.
Thank you, Eddie. And then really quick, we're seeing in general that a lot of you are still figuring out the best model for your RPA COE, whether that is for your new implementations or for the support of your existing implementations. So if you see value in scheduling a brief introductory discussion with Eduardo and his team, just to understand where you are in your journey, share some lessons learned with our support team, we would be happy to have those conversations. So I'll just do a quick polling question so for those of you that are interested in getting that schedule, we can contact you after the webinar. And then the other thing, some people were asking about if they were going to get a copy of the presentation. Typically we send it after this, but a lot of those emails are going to spam sometimes. So if you really, really are interested in getting a copy, I think it would be best if you just shoot me an email. I left my email on the question panel, and that way we make sure that you get the recording and that you get the full copy of the PowerPoint presentation. Okay. So Eddie, I think that, I don't know if Eddie or Courtney, if you have any final thoughts, lessons learned, or anything that you want to share before we leave today.
I just wanted to thank Courtney for being part of the panel. I really appreciate her insights and hope to have her again.
Thanks, guys. It's been great, as always, participating, and a great opportunity to hear your thoughts as well. So thanks.
Well, thank you so much, Courtney and Eddie. This was very insightful, and we look forward to the next sessions in the upcoming months. And thank you, everyone, also for joining. We really appreciate your time. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.